Okay, I want you to try a little experiment with me. Picture yourself walking into a really high-end hotel lobby, or maybe you're at a trendy brunch spot, the kind with like $20 avocado toast.
Right.
Or maybe you're just at home, you've got a deadline, and you ask your smart speaker to play some chill vibes or focus music.
Yeah.
What is the sound that comes out?
It's almost always the same sound.
Right. It's that stuttering, syncopated rhythm on a nylon string guitar. A soft, breathy voice, maybe a little piano in the background.
It is Bossa Nova.
It is Bossa Nova. We treat it as the global soundtrack for relaxation. It's just wallpaper music.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, and this is why we're digging into all this research today. If you think Bossa Nova is just background noise, you are missing one of the most radical cultural explosions of the 20th century.
That's the great irony of the genre, isn't it?
It is.
Because it sounds so effortless and so smooth, we tend to overlook that it was, in fact, a revolution. The sources we're looking at paint a picture of a musical movement that didn't just bubble up by accident.
No.
It was engineered. It was a deliberate modernist project that redefined how an entire country saw itself.
Exactly. We're talking about a genre that took the heartbeat of a nation, put it in a tuxedo, and then taught it complex harmonic theory.
That's a great way to put it.
So, the mission for this deep dive is to rescue Bossa Nova from the elevator. We need to understand the big four, the personalities who built this sound, and the specific modernism of the era that made it all possible.
And to do that, we have to start with a definition, because people throw the term around pretty loosely.
Yeah.
Bossa Nova literally translates from Portuguese as new trend or new wave. It came out of Rio de Janeiro in the late 1950s.
And the recipe is actually pretty specific, isn't it? I mean, it's not just slow samba.
No, it's a very precise fusion. Imagine the rhythmic DNA of samba, which is this driving, percussive soul of Brazil, right?
Carnival music. Big drums.
Exactly. Now, strip away all the drums, take that entire rhythm and transfer it to a single guitar. Then you infuse that with the complex, almost impressionistic harmonies of American jazz.
That's the key right there. It's the street carnival energy of samba meeting the kind of intellectual rigor of cool jazz.
Precisely.
And to understand how on earth that happened, our sources highlight four specific figures. And I love how the research breaks this down: the philosopher, the dreamer, the bridge, and the strategist.
It's a perfect way to tell the story. You have João Gilberto, who invented the beat.
Right.
Antônio Carlos Jobim, who built the architecture of the songs.
The composer.
Stan Getz, who built the bridge to the United States. And then Sergio Mendes, who figured out how to keep it on the pop charts.
So let's start at year zero, the philosopher. The sources call this man the god of Bossa Nova. We're talking about João Gilberto.
Born in 1931 in Bahia. You literally cannot have the genre without him. I mean, there are plenty of great composers, but Gilberto invented the physical mechanics of the sound.
Right.
He developed this unique guitar style called the batida.
This is the part that fascinates me. For any musicians listening, this is technically so difficult. He basically turned his guitar into a one-man drum kit.
That's it, exactly. Traditional samba relies on a surdo, that's the big bass drum, and a tamborim, a small hand drum.
Right.
Gilberto figured out how to use his thumb to play the bass drum beat, while his fingers plucked the syncopated rhythms of all the smaller percussion. The guitar became totally self-sufficient.
He didn't need a band.
He was the band.
But the paradox, and this is what makes him a philosopher to me, is that while his hands were doing this incredibly complex work, the volume was almost nothing.
Right. Before Gilberto, Brazilian singers were often belters. Big radio stars, big vibrato projecting to the back of the room.
Sure.
Gilberto went the complete opposite direction. He sang with almost no vibrato. He'd trail off at the ends of phrases. He practically whispered.
There is a story in the notes from 1958 that I think is the defining moment of the entire genre. It's from the recording session for the album Chega de Saudade.
The genesis point.
So picture the scene. Hot studio in Rio. The sound engineer is used to recording big bands, loud singers, and he's getting frustrated with Gilberto. He stops the take and says, "João, your guitar's too quiet. We can barely hear it. You need to play louder."
And Gilberto, who was famously a bit uncompromising.
Yeah, he doesn't apologize. He doesn't start strumming harder.
No.
He just looks at the engineer and delivers this legendary line: "Don't turn up the guitar. Turn down everything else.
Turn down everything else.
Yeah,
It's so profound. It's not just audio advice. It's a manifesto.
Yes.
It encapsulates the entire Bossa Nova philosophy. It's about subtraction. It's about intimacy. In a world that was getting louder, I mean, this is the late 50s, rock and roll is revving up.
Yeah.
Gilberto found power in quietness.
It's such a confident move to just whisper and force the world to lean in to hear you. And that album, Chega, Saudade, 1959, it really did change everything.
Oh, it swept through Rio like a fever. It was the historical masterpiece that kicked off the new era. And if you follow his career, he just doubles down on this philosophy.
Like with his 1960 album, O Amor, O Sorriso y a Flor.
Love the smile on the flower. Yeah. That album really perfected the harmony between his vocal phrasing and that percussive guitar. They just become one single instrument.
And the sources also point to a much later album, the self-titled João Gilberto from 1973. People call it the White Album of Bossa Nova.
Yes, that's a fascinating one. By 73, the Bossa Nova craze was kind of over and had gotten commercial, but Gilberto releases this stark, minimal, hypnotic album. It showed his maturity. It proved that for him, this wasn't some pop fad. It was a profound world of sound that he was still living in.
So Gilberto provides the rhythm and the voice. But a voice needs a song. It needs a structure.
Right.
And that brings us to the second pillar of our big four, the dreamer, Antônio Carlos Jobim.
Also known as Tom Jobim, born 1927 in Rio. If Gilberto was the performance, Jobim was the architect.
He was the composer.
The composer, the pianist, the arranger. When you hum a bossa nova tune, Girl from Ipanema, Wave, Desafinado, you are humming a Jobim melody.
The thing about Jobim is that he brought the harmonic sophistication. Gilberto had the beat, but Jobim brought those lush, jazzy chords that sound a little bit sad and a little bit happy all at the same time.
Exactly. He was influenced by French impressionists like Debussy. He loved those floating, ambiguous chords. But here's the detail in the research that I just love. Jobim wasn't only looking at Europe. He was a massive fanboy of an American icon.
This blew my mind. You think of these guys as being so deeply Brazilian, but Jobim was obsessed with Frank Sinatra.
Worshipped him. The source material says he considered Sinatra a god. He dreamed for years of collaborating with him. And this is so important because it shows Bossa Nova was never an isolationist movement. It was always looking outward.
He wanted a seat at the big table.
He wanted Brazilian music to be part of the great American songbook.
And that dream,
it
actually came true.
It did. 1967, the album Francis Albert Sinatra and Antônio Carlos Jobim.
I listened to this again while we were prepping, and it's amazing. Jobim essentially forces Sinatra to sing Bossa Nova. Sinatra, who's usually this swaggering, punchy singer, has to get quiet.
It was a career peak for Jobim. Can you imagine being a composer from Rio and the voice of the century is singing your songs in your style? It validated the entire genre on a massive scale.
But he wasn't just a hit maker. He was a serious experimental composer.
Absolutely. The notes mention his 1963 album, The Composer of Desafinado Plays. That's a musician's album. You can really hear his sophisticated chord progressions. But then look at 1970, the album Stoneflower. The notes call this experimental, and they're right.
That's the one where he starts getting a little funky, right?
Yes. He's using electric pianos, different percussion, moving toward a fusion sound. He was always pushing the boundaries. And even as late as 87 with Terra Brasilis, he was blending tradition with modern orchestration. Jobim was always trying to elevate the music.
Okay, so we have the voice, Gilberto, and the composer, Jobim. They've conquered Brazil. But for a genre to go truly global, especially in the early 60s, you needed to break America.
The American market was everything.
And you couldn't just export Portuguese songs to U.S. radio. You needed a translator. A bridge.
Enter Stan Getz.
Stan Getz, born in Philadelphia in 1927, a jazz saxophone player. The sources call him the bridge of jazz bossa. Now, why him? I mean, plenty of jazz guys were messing with Latin rhythms back then. Dizzy Gillespie was doing it.
True.
Why was Getz the one who made it stick?
It all comes down to tone. We talked about Gilberto's subtract everything philosophy, the whisper, the intimacy.
Right.
Stan Getz had a saxophone tone that fit that perfectly. They called him the sound. He played lyrically. He wasn't aggressive like the bebop players. He was breathy, melodic, and just cool.
So sonically, he was the American equivalent of Gilberto's voice.
Basically. It started in 1962 with the album Jazz Samba, which he did with Charlie Bird. That album introduced the idea of bossa nova to the U.S. jazz scene, and it was a huge hit.
But that wasn't the big one.
No. The real explosion, the seismic shift that changed pop culture, happened 2 years later.
1964. The album gets Gilberto. This is the Avengers Assemble moment. You have Stan Getz on sax, João Gilberto on guitar and vocals, and Jobim on piano.
It's the holy trinity of the genre. And almost by accident, you get the one ingredient that made it a radio smash, a Astrud Gilberto.
João's wife at the time.
Exactly. She wasn't a professional singer. She was just the only one in the room who spoke enough English to sing the translated lyrics of Girl from Ipanema.
And that's the magic, isn't it? Her voice was so flat, so detached, almost amateur in a way.
It was.
It sounded like a regular girl you'd actually see on the beach.
It added this layer of innocence that Americans just fell in love with. And the magnitude of this album, you just can't overstate it. This wasn't just a jazz hit. It won the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1965.
Which means it beat the Beatles.
It beat A Hard Day's Night. Just think about that.
Yeah.
At the absolute height of Beatlemania, a soft Portuguese-English jazz collaboration was the most acclaimed album in America.
Wow.
That is the power of this fusion. It took the complex rhythms of Brazil and smoothed them out with Getz's lyrical sax.
So Getz Gilberto makes Bossa Nova a household name. But we all know what happens to trends. They burn hot and then they burn out. By 66, the Beatles are getting psychedelic, rock is getting harder, and Bossa Nova is starting to sound a little polite.
It could have just faded away.
It needed a reinvention. It needed someone who didn't care about purity and just wanted to survive on the pop charts.
And that brings us to our fourth figure, the pop strategist, Sergio Mendes.
Born in 1941, he's the next generation. The sources paint him as a guy who had his eye on the radio from day one.
Absolutely. He saw that for the music to survive, it had to evolve. He formed the group Brazil 66. Their debut album, Herb Alpert Presents Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66, drops in 1966. And this is the moment Bossa Nova reignites in the U.S., but in a totally different form.
Yeah.
The key track here is Mas Canada, which, I mean, is still an absolute banger today.
It is. But just listen to the difference. Gilberto is introspection. Mendes is pure extroversion. The tempo is way faster.
The vocals are punchy, they're layered, almost choral. It's Bossa Nova redesigned for AM radio.
So Mendes was a fusionist in a pop sense. Gilberto was a purist. Jobim was a symphonist.
And Mendes was looking at the Billboard Hot 100, and he was not afraid to mix Bossa Nova with Western pop music. By 1969, on the album Fool on the Hill, he's covering the Beatles.
That is such a bold move, taking the biggest band in the world and giving them the full Rio treatment.
And it worked. He proved the genre was flexible enough to handle those melodies, and he kept pushing it. The notes mention his 1983 album, Confetti.
Yeah.
By then, he's mixing in 80s sounds, synthesizers, funk bass lines. He basically dragged Bossa Nova kicking and screaming into the modern era.
He ensured it didn't just become a museum piece from the 1960s.
He proved it was a living language.
Okay, so we've traced this line from a whisper in an apartment with Gilberto to Jobim symphonies, across the bridge with Getz, and onto the pop charts with Mendes. It's an incredible journey. But I want to zoom out for a minute. The research notes usually help us connect the dots here.
Right.
Why does this music feel so timeless?
Right.
Why does an album from 1959 still sound modern today?
This is where we have to look at the context. Bossa Nova wasn't just a collection of catchy tunes. It was a reflection of a specific moment in history.
The late 50s, early 60s in Brazil.
Often called the golden years. There was this incredible sense of optimism and rapid urbanization. They were building a new capital city, Brasilia, from scratch.
In the middle of the country.
Right, and it was this modernist, architectural, marble white, concrete, sweeping curves, futuristic designs.
So the country was literally reinventing its own face.
Exactly. And Bossa Nova was the soundtrack to that reinvention. Just like the architecture was clean, functional, and stripped of old-fashioned ornament, the music was stripped down.
It was modernism in sound form.
It was sophisticated, it was urban. The sources call the music a document of that specific time.
A time when Brazil was interacting with the world on equal footing.
Yes. It wasn't folk music from the countryside. It was high art from the city. It perfectly captured the optimism of that Cold War cultural exchange where the world was suddenly interested in this cool, sophisticated version of the tropics.
And yet today, we mostly encounter it as a vibe on a playlist.
That's the modern paradox. The notes mention that today it serves as a symbol of Brazilian culture and relaxation on digital platforms.
Spotify, YouTube.
It appears constantly in AI recommendations for study music.
Because it works. I mean, it is scientifically soothing.
It is. That combination of the steady samba pulse, which kind of mimics the human heartbeat, and the complex resolving jazz harmonies creates the state of active relaxation.
It keeps your brain engaged just enough to not be bored, but it's calm enough not to be distracting.
Which is why it's become the default soundtrack for the digital age.
It's just amazing to think that João Gilberto's stubbornness, his demand to turn down everything else, created a sound that 60 years later is being recommended by algorithms to help people focus on spreadsheets.
It just speaks to the quality of the composition. You can strip it down, speed it up, put it in an elevator or a stadium, and that core beauty just remains. It offers two things at once: healing, that sense of comfort, and documentation as a historical record.
So we've gone from Gilberto's revolutionary whisper to Jobim symphonies, across the bridge with Getz, onto the pop charts with Mendes. It's a great reminder that soft doesn't mean weak.
Not at all.
This quiet music really did change the world.
It was a quiet riot.
I love that. So here's the thought I want to leave you with today. The next time you're in a cafe or you put on a Lazy Sunday playlist and you hear that stuttering guitar and that soft voice, just stop for a second. Don't just let it wash over you. Ask yourself, are you just hearing background music? Or are you listening to the sound of a country reinventing its identity on the global stage? Because once you hear the history, the engineering, the ambition, you can never really listen to it the same way again.
It's the sound of a new wave that never really stopped rolling.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.